panel discussion about situational awareness in the command room. So each of the four of us have very unique roles, I guess, in a building, in a project, in a site. We're going to talk about how all of this comes together into a focal point that is the command room. So we've got Steve, Sean, and Tony, and then myself. We'll start off. Those of you who've been listening to me all day, I'm Jeff Drews, Southwest Microwave. We do perimeter security detection. We essentially make widgets that operate outdoors, harsh environments for long periods of time, and no matter what, tell you somebody crossed this line. That's the world I live in. Specifically, I'm the senior sales manager. I handle everything federal government, whether that's an agency or a military base, an embassy, or and also commercial nuclear plants throughout the United States. So, Tony, you want to share a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Tony Babich. I'm the Director of Sales for North and South America. I've been at Command for 12 or 13 years. I also work hand in hand with our product development team, which is in Salzburg, Austria, to look at new products and solve customer problems. So I've been guiding that process for the last 5 years and really looking at this exact subject, actually, of how do we create situational awareness in the command center, but also on the ground as well, too. So at the point of transaction, that's one of the things I've been focused on pretty intensely over the past 5 years, and we've made some good strides in that moving forward and helping that situation awareness happen no matter where it is, in the transaction itself.
Okay. Sean, introduce yourself.
My name's Sean Brady. I'm the Vice President of Product Development with Winstead. Winstead is a control room solutions company. We supply everything from furniture to racks to most of the hard systems that are in a control room, but we also offer some consulting services as well to make sure the control rooms are kind of set up the way that they should be. Looking at it from an operator out perspective to make sure that we've got all the ergonomics and all the HMI interface done correctly to put everybody in the best situation to do their job every day.
Steve?
It's Steve Caroselli. I'm the CEO and founder of Orion Interest Control. We're a technology company focusing on people sensing specifically around perimeter detection of turnstiles in lobbies and perimeters, as well as LiDAR-based solutions for tailgate detection and people sensing and soon vehicle sensing. So that's what we do.
Great. Well, thank you all. Hopefully that gave you sort of an understanding of how the four of us in completely different industries ended up on this same panel up here. Sean, you mentioned before we were talking, you have some industry data that will sort of bring all of this together and give us a focal point to start talking from.
Yeah, I think it's always important to kind of start with some market metrics to let everybody know kind of where we are in the state of control rooms and where we were just 2 years ago to where we are today. And there's been some industry-leading market intelligence that's kind of come out here recently that's been compiled by a number of different data sources. Some of the companies like Omdia, FutureSource. There's been a direct operator control room survey that's been done by one of the other manufacturers in the business. And it came out with some pretty interesting data. And one of the things I want to start with is starting to talk about the problems that today's operator faces. Whether it's an operator, whether it's a controller, whether it's a data analyst, whatever it may be. The first primary issue that they see is just workflow complexity. And how are we able to manage some of that workflow complexity and the fact that we're getting all these new data points in front of the operator, and how do they need to discern that information and also kind of cancel out the noise. The next one being reactive decision making. Of course, everything that we talk about here at the security forum today has been all about, how do we look at what that intrusion detection looks like, and then how do we create actionable data for someone to take advantage of. So that's the next one. And the last one that I want to talk about that's usually often overlooked, and that's operator fatigue. So operator fatigue, again, comes from all of these things that are compounded. And really when someone's sitting in that control room for 12 hours a day, making sure that they've got all the fatigue mitigation in place so that they can stay alert, do their job, and eliminate some distractions is really one of the other key focal points to what we want to do. And those are the top three of those problems that they're facing today. But one of the other more interesting pieces of information that came out of this too was that 50% of operators, analysts, controllers in control rooms today, if they're in an environment that is an inefficient workflow, they're looking to leave their job within 6 months. 50%. That's a big number. Okay, so think about that when you look at all the different systems that we're all trying to sell and integrate into the control room to really make their life better. But now on the upside of that too, though, is that 91% of operators, if they work in a efficient environment, really truly are happy with the environment that they want to stay. So when you look at some of that market data, it'll really kind of allow you to, kind of sell a little bit more about why you're here and what you're trying to do, because really all we're trying to do is to make the control room better, enhance the operation, improve mission safety, and do it in a comfortable way that allows everyone to discern the information that we're providing. Because again, the goal here is to stay on task and to stay on mission.
Yeah, good. So one of the questions we sort of all agreed on beforehand, and I think we'll drive it towards your 3 points there, is what are we seeing changing in the industry right now? How are these things being addressed? What are the 1 or 2 things that in our individual industries or specifications or fields are we seeing that are changing? Steve, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we're obviously not in the control room. We're pushing information into the control room. So being a turnstile manufacturer is an automatic choke point, right? So we're seeing a lot more things being added at that point, whether that's voice, right, having direct communication at that point, whether that's adding biometrics. Occupancy and count data has always been kind of the undercurrent, but how do we move that faster in real time so that in an event you've got real-time counting of people in a space? Yeah. So really the newest thing we're seeing is just what can we add to that point to give better information faster. A lot of requests around weapons detection, discrete metal detection. I don't think the customers always know what they're asking for, but trying to put it more hidden in the space is kind of what we're seeing.
Excellent. Tony, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. Yeah. The reality is, I think that we're seeing a lot of stress come into the control room. There's a lot more alarms going off, a lot more events, a lot of things we have to kind of look at. How do we filter things out that aren't necessarily real alarms and events? And those are the things I think that are affecting the control room today. There are a host of other things too. We always look at how do we automate certain processes so they don't come into the control room as well. Mm-hmm. So, we're looking at what can we develop from a product standpoint that allows some of these transactions to happen at the point of entry or at the point of transaction, so it doesn't actually, the call doesn't actually roll in to the command center, and those unnecessary type calls aren't coming in. So we're using things like conversational AI. So how do we solve the simple things, those simple questions that people are asking by using conversational AI through the intercom at the door to solve those problems? And there's plenty of use cases and applications. The best thing you could possibly do is look at what are people calling in for, especially when it comes in to intercom and bringing all the communications back into one place. And how do we resolve those issues by answering simple questions? That leaves your team with more of a view of the types of situations that they actually need to get involved in, not the stuff they need to answer of how do I get to the highway from here, or simple questions that people ask that you wonder why they're calling in through the intercom or control to the control center to get those answers.
Okay. Sean, you want to?
Yeah, for me, it's again, it's a lot about data aggregation. So again, it's all about all these different disparate data points that we're kind of seeing coming from multiple systems. But then how does that visualize back to the person sitting at the console? And there's tons of different pieces of data that they're looking at, but how do we sift through that data then and make it more actionable? How do we find and prioritize the right alarms? And again, we talk about false positives, we talk about false negatives a lot in the security world, false verifications and positive verifications. But really, it's then looking at whether it's on an overview display or whether it's on a local display at the console. How do we call attention to it and then reduce the amount of time it takes for that person to react to that data? Because again, that reaction time is really paramount to whether it's a life or death situation and how long that response time really is to get into it. So I think those are some of the key pieces of information. Just again, create better actionable data. You mentioned through AI, but it's really about response times and how can we affect that. Now, there's a lot of tools out there again that go along with that when it comes to all these different data sets and visualizations. Smart KVM is a big one in the control room world right now of we can take data points from everywhere in the control room and everywhere from cloud-based data to on-prem type data and bringing it to the operator. But again, it gets to a point where it becomes data overload. So being able to find the right pieces of data, make it actionable, make it more present for them to do their jobs, I think is really important.
So I've got sort of two answers to this, if you'll bear with me. One was a trend I started to see in the last couple of years that sort of took me by surprise. So again, everything I do is right on the edge of the perimeter, right? And it's got to come in, an alarm. The sensor out there has got an alarm. Somebody's got to be notified, and then there's got to be a response. And Southwest Microwave has always had a myriad of ways of getting that alarm data to that head-end, to the VMS, to the intrusion system, whatever it was. We've had our own flavors of maps, and but more importantly, I'm a guy that says, hey, let's utilize what you have. Your VMS does this. It manages your cameras. You want camera verification on any alarm, so let's tie it all into there. And I've started to see a trend in the last couple of years where instead of using the map that would be within Milestone or Genetec or BVMS or whatever it was, they wanted a separate map. It was sort of odd to me because I'm a make this simple thing. That's just the way I think, and if you can do it there. But I had several sites, large sites, and I live in the high security realm. They wanted a dedicated map over here and still alarms going over here for video. And I think as I've sort of begun to process that and have conversations about the whys behind that, it's an act of simplifying things. Yeah. I want this map to show up and show a clear alarm here. I want this to do this simultaneously, and then I have some level of redundancy because in a high security world, we don't want to lose alarms. So that's sort of a trend, and I talked about this a little bit last year, but it took me by surprise. Be honest, I'm always pushing for third-party integrations rather than a relay output or a map that's limited. I want to bring that all into one encompassing viewpoint for the customer, for the end user, because we don't want fatigue. So that was one thing. A bigger trend I think I've picked up on the industry is, we've sort of been talking about it all day, but the utilization of AI for alarms. So I have used as an elevator pitch for 10 plus years now when I'm promoting my products that everybody that makes a fence sensor or everybody that makes a volumetric sensor, they can all detect. They're going to detect something, right? The difference is not whether they can detect, it's whether they can tune out nuisance activity, right? Operator fatigue is huge. If I've got 10,000 alarms coming in here over a month's time, those alarms get ignored, accidents happen, problems happen, right? So the companies that have been able to take their sensors and build reputation and longevity have been able to tune those nuisance alarms out and make sure we're always getting. I don't get the luxury of missing an alarm ever. Wherever I'm at, it's 40 for 40 testing, 30 for 30 testing. That means 40 crawls, 40 walks, 40 runs, 40 jumps in every zone over and over and over. And we don't get to miss, right? So we have to have, especially with an outdoor sensor, we have a certain level of nuisance alarms that are there. You find that right balance. Well, what I've seen in the industry is trying to lay AI on top of that. Mm-hmm. And what that's doing, I think, sometimes is taking a sensor that may not perform as well, let you turn all the sensitivity up all the way because you don't care how many times it nuisances, right, or it false positives, and then you can use AI to put that layer on to distinguish that out. Well, that works to a certain level, even to the point San Diego National Labs is developing them. I have competitors on their own end developing these AI engines that are lying after the fact. There's a layer or a level, though, where that becomes counterproductive because if you start tuning all of those out or too many out, then you start missing alarms, which is, like I said, can be counterproductive. So I've seen a real push for that. I'm not sure. I think in the end, we get there. I don't know that we're there now, and it's a process, especially with outdoor sensors. But it all goes back to what you said, operator fatigue. If we can't distinguish between real alarms and false alarms, or we have too high of false alarms, they're just ignored.
Yeah, great point. When it comes to operator fatigue and a lot of those things that we talk about, there is really proper control room design is also very important. And again, understanding all those things that create fatigue or distraction, all those things are whether it's traffic or whether it's someone that's coming into the room that doesn't need to be. But anytime you take their focus away from their primary objective of watching and maintaining a system, that's really what the other part of that we want to try to mitigate from the very beginning is just making sure that we look at all of these different things. And there are many things that we look at in control room design, but understanding what those are to put the operator in the best position possible is important.
So I'll open this up to all of you, but have we seen a change in, and I'll get to that question in just a second, have we seen a change in physical design, layouts, furniture, that type of thing? How much has that come into play of fatigue?
Hate to bogart the conversation, but
It's your world, I know.
yeah, but I mean, it is important, and really it's all about understanding what the right collaboration is between people, understanding where the entry points are in a room, understanding the right traffic flow in the space. I mean, there's literally 100 different points that we're looking at and recognizing when we go through design. But again, it's understanding it from the operator's perspective that's really important, because again, when you go into a control room and you talk to the operator, you get a unique perspective of the guy that deals with these problems every single day. When you talk to the control room manager, they're going to have a different point of view. And then when you get to the executive level, they're going to have another different point of view. So again, you want to distill it down to, if you really are trying to affect mission safety, it's get it from the operator and then work from that operator out. And then just put into place best practices. Distractions and fatigue can come in from a lot of different areas. It can come in from lights, just like that guy right there. So understanding lighting, understanding noise, understanding all these different things that create fatigue. Data points, too many alarms, actionable data. Really, it's a lot to take into account, but understanding all of those things really makes a difference when you're looking at control and design.
Excellent. You had a question?
Great points.
Very valid points, and I think we've all seen horror stories. I was at a site, it's been 20 plus years now, but I was doing some work, and there was a rule, this really will date it, they all had DVD players, and they weren't supposed to be watching movies, but as soon as the last manager left, the oven door opened, and they pulled out a stack of DVDs and a player, and that has never left my mind. Because if you're watching a DVD, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? The other side of that is manpower issues at some of these. I've watched them disparagingly, disgruntledly take second shifts because somebody didn't show up, and I've watched some jump all over it because they wanted the overtime. But when somebody's sitting in front of a console for 18, 20 hours, they're not as functional or efficient. So. That's Jeff's sidebar, but have we seen changes in that within the industry? Any comments there?
The nice thing about the space that you and I work in is there's a lot of government regulation.
Yes.
So some of those regulatory bodies, will specifically say you have to have the right procedures in place. You have to have, certain your fit for duty standards, things like that. So understanding some of those things, that makes that side of the equation easier. Now, in your situation where you're dealing with contract personnel, that's a different thing, because again, they're less likely to be in tune with really what standards should be in place and what those operating procedures should be, and they're only as good as the ones that the company writes. But really, understanding if you're dealing with direct employees and making sure that they are in that efficient environment is going to keep them and going to have them retained a little bit longer. So again, the cost of turnover is so incredibly high, when it comes to training new people, getting them more familiar with the technology that's there, those company procedures. I think that's the other one, is that we really want to focus on retaining people, but then also pulling in some of these standards that we see elsewhere to be able to write better procedures.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm also seeing a trend. We're getting a lot of requests and questions about monitoring of the personnel state within a command center. So not only are they there, are they at the station, but are they in duress of any kind? Are they awake? Are they healthy? So we started to look at radar, like close range radar technology that would detect heart rate and breathing, as an example, as to use for presence. So that was really interesting to me, that question, right? Not only are they there, are they awake?
Yeah.
And especially during an escalation, an event, to make sure they're there. on the other side of the coin was during an escalation, do we have too many people in the command center, right? So we were actually looking at occupancy within a command center. So if there's a hurricane happening and you're, a large box store needing to deploy, hey, there's too many people in the center. If you're not essential, get out. And automating that process with counting and automated, voice enunciation. That was kind of interesting to me that would be a conversation even within a command center.
Yeah, I wouldn't have even thought
You've
about
got to be
that.
efficient. So in a storm or some type of environment, a lot of management tends to come in and want to have a procedure, right, and a protocol that says that's not appropriate. You'll get your report.
Human nature is that we all want to go and help when there's a situation, so then you do tend to see that influx of people that start to come into the control room. But as you mentioned, though, that creates a huge amount of distraction. And then it's people could be standing over your shoulder. It could be, hey, do you need anything? Can I help you? It's still taking your mind off of what you're trying to do and focus on the restoration side of things. But yeah, huge distraction, huge problems.
Yeah, super interesting. I guess the first thought when you mentioned the heart rate monitors, that type of thing, is, in my world, because I don't see that side of it, right? I'm always at the edge. But my mind immediately went to doing webinars, and the webinar softwares will tell you how many people are online, but also how many people are engaged right now, how many people have eyes on it. And so that same principle applies, but to a much more important factor, right, of protecting our high security sites. Excellent. This is why we have these conversations. Yep.
I think that leads to a lot of companies and organizations are standardizing, right? And standardization is something we've talked about for a long time, but you still feel like it hasn't happened everywhere because there's so many disparate systems out there. And, on our end, if you're answering calls from different intercoms, there might be 10 different things you're trying to answer, whether it's a phone, whether it's an intercom call, or some other way of answering calls from different systems. That disparate nature of things really kind of leads to a lot more stress because you have to operate each system a little bit differently, right? So trying to standardize for having one thing that you can use that you're familiar with and it's easy to train on is, I think, critically important. I think you're starting to see a lot more of that happen. Obviously, it comes down to budgets and how much money do you have to spend to do that. But the more you can find something to standardize on and use going forward, the better off you're going to be in the long term. Even if it costs a bit more money up front, sometimes it's better for you down the road. So you kind of have to look at that path for 5 years and say, I'm going to standardize on this. Let's start moving everything out and migrating it out to a proper, system that we want to use in the future. And that way, you get to a place in 5 years where you need to be, rather than just hodgepodging things together. We still see a lot of that happening.
Something else along that same line too is, it's okay to stay up to date on what product you have, but really the other thing to kind of stay in tune with is what are the control room trends, where are things going? And again, there's a lot of information that's out there. There's a lot of training that's out there, webinars and that sort of thing. But again, kind of operators are creatures of habit. So we do the best that we can with what we're given, and we're not always given a lot. So we try to make the most of it. But really, it's understanding what's available from a technology standpoint to make your environment better, because then you can start to advocate for some of those things that would make you more efficient. So again, I think that's another thing is to kind of stay in tune with what's out there, not just the products that you're already using.
It's true. There's an education aspect to all levels because although I agree the contract guard force shouldn't be dictating everything that's supposed to be done, should be done, or protocols and standards, the end user should, but the contract guard force should be up to speed and educated on what's available, and they should be working cohesively to attain the best case scenario. And there's always, we have fads, right? We have things that come into play, and it's popular now, and then they fade away, and we find, and so we don't necessarily, we want stability, right? But we also want to be in tune with what are the latest technologies and what's out there. On that note, I've talked a little bit about the edge coming in, right? So, Tony, you want to talk a little about maybe what are you seeing different? Maybe how are we getting, an alarm comes in, how are we communicating it back out to the edge? Because it's not just those operators controlling what's going on. That data has to get somewhere, be reported somewhere, done something with. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that we're working on for the past 5 years is how do we create situational awareness, not just in the command center, but on the ground for the people that actually maybe need that information. So there's great tools for mass notification, and I think that's great, but it doesn't always work very well when you're trying to get into a transaction, right? So what do I mean by that, right? So if you, let's just use access control as an example. So I have access control events, and within these events, that can trigger an alarm, and that alarm means that somebody's got to pay attention to it. Well, if it's a door force open, that might be a little bit more critical than maybe that somebody's trying to get in a door and it's access denied, right? If door force open, you want to respond to that quickly. Access denied, you want to respond to it, but maybe not as quickly as that. So how do you create a situation where, in our case, we're using both visual and audible, visual signage and audible communication. So in a door force open situation, we're immediately placing a call, we're getting a snapshot of that person, and we're trying to catch them in the act of forcing that door open. For door propped open, we may give a 20-second countdown that says, please close the door, or an alarm will be triggered, right, before that alarm is actually triggered. So these are type of things that we're trying to look at. How do we create operational workflow at the point of transaction so that these alarms aren't going in? Obviously, depends on, the level of, security that you have at that specific site. Is it a low or high level security? You got to decide what you want to implement there. But how do we create that workflow at the point of communication? Or it could be if you get some sort of detection on the fence line. The simple one is audio broadcast down, right? Let somebody know that they're being watched. That might mean that they might walk away, right? But obviously, if they're there and they continue on, you have to dispatch somebody out there and take care of the situation. So there's a lot of different examples of that, but really it's focusing on how do we create the transaction for that specific purpose, at that specific location, or a specific site, right? So if you do get a false or somebody trying to get into the outside layer of a nuclear facility, maybe it's a notification that goes off just at that site for those people to be aware of there's an event. So it's not just the person in the SOC that knows it. It's also the people at the facility know it, so they know how to respond as well during that situation.
Excellent. Sean, Steve, any comments, thoughts in addition to that? From the outside, or from the inside out?
Yeah, from the inside out, it's for me, a lot of times it's more about the communication that's happening in the control room and how well it's received externally. So again, in our world, we kind of work in every type of control room out there. But each one of them are still critical when you're talking to the people in the field. So for instance, if there's a lot of noise present in the control room, that radio communication back to the field, to the personnel that's out there trying to resolve an issue or a problem, if they can't audibly be heard correctly, there could be a big impact in what the term no versus go means. Mm-hmm. So again, whether if you think about that from a security standpoint or from a standpoint of someone trying to close a safety valve, there's a lot that has to do with making sure that all those noise requirements that are being resolved in the control room aren't being affected by radio traffic out to personnel trying to deal with impacts in the field.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff, I think the two things that impact our world from the control room out are one, lockdown, right? So if there is a situation, just making sure nobody else is coming in, or in certain cases, making sure people are exiting the right direction, right? So maybe certain lanes are going to be locked down in certain areas and we're directing people a different direction. And the other is really real-time occupancy counting. So how many people are still in the space? Do we need to send in first responders or not? That kind of information. So we're not going to tell you who's in the space, but it's really nice to know there's 2 people or there's none, right? Because you're going to go in after 2. You don't have to go in after none.
Right, exactly. Excellent. Well, we're down to in our question and answer phase. I'm going to give everybody a chance for some last minute comments up here, but I just wanted to reach out to the audience. I know we've had a couple, you're not shy. So any specific questions to any of us individually or collectively? I think that depends individually. So I have a problem in my industry. I build microwaves and fence sensors that last 15, 20 years. So quite frankly, as a commissioned sales guy, sometimes I wish they'd break after 5 because I could get some recurring revenue and drive those conversations. So there's not a lot of change in our world because they're deployed. However, we have programs, we have continued reach out, we offer free training, we offer free seminars, we do stuff like this all the time. Now, the question is, does it reach your inbox and are you interested? I can't force anybody to partake in what we have available, but we try to be continuous about those type of things. And it really depends. I think the bigger aspect when it comes to training is turnover. And as you mentioned, if they want to leave within 6 months, then there is a lot of turnover in our industry. And I don't think that training is quite as high of a focus for the owners and the paid guard services that it should be, would be my perspective. But I'll let the three of you comment.
Yeah, I would say it's probably not happening to a level it should, that's for sure. I think that as a manufacturer, a lot of times we don't necessarily know who the end user is all the time. We try to collect that data. Sometimes it's not shared with us from a systems integrator. The reality is with some of the cloud applications, it becomes a lot easier for us to communicate with everybody that's using our system because we know that that person's there, right? They're logged in as themselves. We can communicate with them and start launching those modules within the cloud-based system to be able to do that type of training. So I think that's going to get better. But the reality is, like we said, you can send out as many emails as you can and put on webinars, and then you put on a webinar and only 50 people show up, and you're expecting 400. So it's a matter of having that and then recording that and putting it in a place where people can go reference back to. But communication is probably one of the toughest things. It's both sides of the party, right? You can communicate to people, but they actually have to read stuff. And I know I get hundreds of emails a day. I only read probably 20% of them because I know the rest of them are just information that I have no way to digest all that information in a day. So it's really a responsibility for, I think, not only the manufacturers and the systems integrators, but also the end users to let us know, hey, we need some type of training on this, or there is this release. Because if we don't necessarily know that, we're not going to know to put on that program. So, I think as I'm not going to speak for everybody in this panel, but the more you communicate with the manufacturer that you're working with or that you have, the better off we're going to be moving forward. Because I don't think that communication happens enough. I think it does in certain instances in certain customers, but not all of them.
Yeah, I think to the point you were making earlier about ownership, needing to take ownership and creating that requirement for ongoing training, but also when, right, and in what environment, because to your earlier point, it can't be a DVD situation. You're there to do a job, but if you don't have continued education on the products, nobody wins. And I'm hearing this more and more from the end users as well, is they want this information. They keep asking, why isn't it available? We're going, it is available. Like, it's always been available. So there's that, what that disconnect is. And I think with programs like FAST, what SIA is doing for doing more retention and recruitment in the industry, I'm starting to see more attention to the training programs, but then how do we get it into the current workforce? It is a question.
I can speak to the point from a training aspect. So in the nuclear industry specifically, NRC-regulated facilities, training is paramount. These security personnel, INC or their maintenance guys, anybody who's working on the equipment, literally they have a list of credentials that they have to log in every day and check, are all my training protocols up? And so that may be, a lot would say, I have said before, the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, can be very stringent, sometimes over-regulated, it drives prices up, but at the same time, they don't lack training there. So there's a healthy balance, and not everybody needs to be protected at the same level that our nuclear power plants do, but we've got to find that right balance. And I think the moral of this whole story is it's a balance between the owners, the guard forces, and the individuals, right? Who we all want people working around us that are motivated and want to learn.
Yeah, great points. And, thinking of the nuclear world, in a previous life, I used to build full-scope simulators, and that's what they had to train on for a ridiculous amount of time before they were even allowed in a real control room. But really, I'm kind of in the same position as Jeff. Our products are built for 15, 20 years for that life cycle. But where we're trying to move forward and move that needle a little bit is to say, our sales force, we're imploring them to go retouch your customers and say, hey, these are the new things that are out there. Technology upgrades happen all the time. That doesn't mean that you're going to replace all your consoles in your control room. It just means that you need to adapt them into the new tools that you're using and setting them up correctly in order to do that. And that's one of the things that we're doing a more constant push out to our customer base to say, hey, are you doing anything new lately? Do you have anything coming up on the horizon? Hey, if you do and when you do, give us a call because we can help you with that. we're not necessarily out there trying to sell you something new. We're just trying to say, hey, there's a better way that you can do this to make you more productive, because operator productivity is one of our cornerstones. But again, I think it kind of just comes down to a lot of that to say it's not just on the manufacturer side. It's also, if you see something on the horizon, reach out and say, hey, is there something that we can do here? But I do always implore in a new control room build situation, after it's deployed, is to say, hey, all the manufacturers that are involved in the project, do an immediate site acceptance test, at commissioning. But then always do a 90-day, 180-day follow-up. And then once you have that in place, people should be familiar with the systems. You'll get different questions at every point. But again, the more touch points that we have, the better off and the more successful the room's going to be. But then don't stop there. A year in, 6 months in, if you have, any kind of a maintenance plan or something like that, call back and see how we can help each other. Because again, we're here to make your lives better.
Yeah,
Any final comments from anyone? We've got about 5 minutes left.
I'm just going to kind of spin on what
Yeah.
you said about the 180-day check. We do that not as well as I'd like us to, but we're fairly well. One quick story is we did a check on a command center, said, how's everything running? Are you getting the information you want? They said, yeah, well, the integrator's been out here every week because that one lane keeps hitting people. Like, that's not something that we expect to have happen. And it turned out to be a 30-second fix in the software where somebody had played with something that they shouldn't have. But as manufacturers, we would expect to call, if an integrator's been out more than once, and they were going out every single week. Our log showed no calls. We called them up, talked to their ownership, said, hey, we fixed it, but please call us in the future. So again, taking more ownership as manufacturers, I think we have to do that, because people are, not only in the control room, across the board, are doing more than they can possibly do, primarily because of the fact that we're staring at screens all day long, like it or not.
Yeah, well, I think we all have stories like that. I showed up at it was a nuclear plant in the Midwest. I was there for a certification. And typically when I install a system, when it goes live, it has to be tested by their security forces. So it's live at that point. As a manufacturer, I come back, I like to do it 30 to 60 days later. I like at least a 30-day window because, again, everything for me is about nuisance alarm versus real alarm and that proper ratio, right? And so I want some time. It has to be operational, it has to be tested for it to be working, but I want some time. And so I come out 30 days later, and I was on the way to this site. I talked to them a week before. Hey, everything's going perfect. I'm thinking this is going to be an easy certification, which ultimately it was. But I talked to 3 different people. Everybody told me how wonderful the system was working. I got there the morning of, and they said, yeah, we've had 600 alarms this morning. I said, well, that's not working perfectly. Where's the communication? I had it fixed in literally 2 minutes. They had 3 feet of fence cable enabled that they shouldn't have that was flapping in the wind. And it didn't need to be enabled on the system. It was a 2-minute fix. But we don't always get the communication. We don't know the problem. And I'm not the guy who doesn't reach out. I'm always involved. So it's sometimes, we can't ever pass the blame. We have to take responsibility, but we all have to be active in it. And if we don't get good data, we can't help.
Like I said, we're all creatures of habit. So, there's 600 alarms. We're just used to dealing with them every day. So we're not necessarily going to report it, but
And I'm scratching my head.
the more we reach out and we communicate with each other, the better off we can do. Because again, operator productivity is the name of the game.
Yep, exactly.